And they were going to build a new clean-burning coal plant to power several new factories that were going to be moving in. And none of that happened because local environmentalists under green funding from the UN and the federal government ran around terrorizing and threatening lawsuits, and it didn't happen. And so those plants were not built anywhere in the United States. It was multiple clean-burning, coal-powered plants that literally nothing comes out of there but steam and carbon dioxide. And we see Al Gore, we see the government, we see Maurice Strong, we see George Soros. They control, and you've spoken about this, but if you can elaborate briefly, about how they get to decide where the federal money goes for new energy, and it's always invested with their companies that they make profits from. I mean, this isn't just them trying to set up a global government and tax system. It's a new dark age where they are the only people that get a letter of marque or license from this new imperial crown of the UN to be able to even engage in any type of manufacturing.
And, of course, what is egregiously terrifying about all this is that you quite rightly laid stress on the fact that the 157 coal-fired plants throughout the United States that are now on hold because of environmental activism of the nastiest kind, exactly you say, the same threats and bullying which the scientists are doing to each other is being done by the environmentalists to the coal corporations and to the businesses that want to set up factories or run their aluminum smelters. These people are saying that you can't build these coal-fired plants here. So what's happening is China is building them over in China. How do we know? Because the Chinese administration publishes every year what's called the Annual Statistical Communique of the People's Republic of China. And in that statistical communique, they said 2 years ago they were going to continue, regardless of what the UN said, and they were going to build 1 or 2 coal-fired power plants every week for the foreseeable future. Every week. It means that in 1 year they will have built almost as many coal-fired plants as the environmentalists have stopped being built in the United States for the whole of the last 10 years.
Lord Monckton.
And those are dirty, dirty plants, burning dirty coal with huge pollutants. The Asian brown haze is the only artifact of man that can be seen from space during the day.
Absolutely. And again, is this not economic espionage where Maurice Strong and the Rockefellers and others openly are the bigger investors in China? They're all making money. There's no environmental standards. And they're trying to deindustrialize the United States, as Maurice Strong has stated. They're doing this to England. They're doing this to Europe, making Europe completely dependent on Russian natural gas. I mean, this is just, the more you look at this crime, it's so diabolical. It's so multifaceted. It's so incredibly evil. How do we stop this fraud?
I think what you do is do exactly what you're doing now. You tell the people of the United States that it is happening, and in the end, they won't tolerate it. Let me give you just one example, picking up on your point there about the natural gas. Now, every day in the North Slope of Alaska, where there is an oil field, they flare off enough natural gas to supply the whole of Western Europe. Now, if it were not for these environmentalists who have stopped that gas pipeline from being built from the North Slope down to the ice-free ports of southern Alaska, across Alaska, if that pipeline had been allowed, then I could send 4 large supertankers every day to Anchorage, let's say, pick up the gas from there, sail it to Grangemouth, plug it into the European gas network there, and I could supply the whole of Europe on gas which at the moment is being burnt to the atmosphere, creating enormous outputs of CO2, which is what they say they're worried about.
Well, at least something good happens.
In the North Slope of Alaska. That is how mad all of this is. It's not just that it's bad, which it is, and all these people making fortunes. I mean, we mentioned Rothschild, for instance. He's just opened a huge gold mine in Russia. It's making millions and millions and millions out of it. And they're all doing it. I mean, in some ways, good luck to them. It's good that they're making money. But what they're also doing is using their financial power to lobby against innocent businesses in the United States such as that aluminum smelter, such as all these coal-fired power stations and nuclear-fired power stations that are so necessary, lobbying against the building of the gas pipeline that could liberate Europe from Russian gas and keep us with our independence and get the gas from what's now being simply wasted to the atmosphere.
This is monopoly capitalism.
In Alaska.
This is monopoly capitalism. Well, we're running out of time here, and I know there's so many other important points that you can relay to our audience, Lord Monckton. If the pendulum's swinging against these people, and the public's now beginning to learn some of the magnitude, not even the full magnitude of the fraud, where do we go from here?
Right. I think the next step is this, that the first thing the UN is going to try, at least I would if I was in its shoes, is to bring forward the next annual conference of the states parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was due to be in Mexico next December to pick up from what Copenhagen did. They may try to bring that forward until June, because they don't want to find, after the next midterm elections in the United States, that they can no longer get any legislation on their side through either House of Congress. And that's what will happen, I think, after the next midterm elections, because people do listen to your program, Alex. They listen to the other programs that I talk on quite regularly, and they are getting the message that they are now governed by people who really seriously mean them harm. And I'm sorry to, if you like, intervene as a Brit in U.S. politics, and if there are any supporters of President Obama listening to this, then I do apologize to you for having to say this. But he is now a danger to the United States of America, and in particular to the danger to the working people of the United States of America, because those are the people, it's the people who run the aluminum smelters, the people who would be digging the coal that can't now be dug, who would be running the power stations that can't be built, who would be working in those factories in Texas that you mentioned that would have been driven by the power stations that can't be built. These are the people, the working people, who are gradually, by 1,000 here and 2,000 there, losing their jobs with no hope of getting their jobs back, because the industries in which they once worked or might have worked will never arise again, because you have an administration that is determined to shut America down.
Well, Lord Monckton, this is a global threat we face, and as you said, calling for a world freedom or world liberty party based in each sovereign nation. We are facing a global threat. It's good that I can warn people in England, you can warn people in America. We're facing the same threat, so we know what we're dealing with here.
That's right. This is a global threat, and you're right to remind people it's not just in the United States, it's not just Obama. We've got Kevin Rudd in Australia, who spent, after he'd heard my Minnesota speech, in which I first drew attention to the world government provisions in the Copenhagen Treaty, he devoted an entire speech of 3/4 of an hour to personally vilifying me. And he was really angry that this plot to set up a world government had been exposed. So he needs to be dealt with, and I'm going to Australia in 2 weeks' time to do a tour of Australia to let people hear the side of the story that the mainstream media simply won't tell them. And let me tell you what's happening down there in Australia at the moment. The government, and it was the previous administration, so again, I'm not making political points here, the previous Conservative administration did a deal with the UN by which to comply with the Kyoto Protocol and cut their carbon emissions. They said that if we designate the farmland of half of Australia as being a carbon sink that can't be farmed, then will that allow us to comply with our obligation under the Kyoto Protocol? And the UN, for some amazing reason, said yes to this. And it means that people who own thousands of acres of farmland are now suddenly not allowed to farm it, and they've been given no compensation at all. So it's not only in America that terrible things are happening and people are losing their livelihood and, of course, the financial asset in their farmland, because it's worthless now because nobody can do anything with it. It's got to be left fallow. And one poor farmer who has been heartbroken by this sudden, unexpected loss of his livelihood and of the capital value of his farm without a penny in compensation from the Australian government in the name of complying with this ludicrous Kyoto Protocol, has climbed up a television mast on his estate. He's living halfway up it now with water only. He's been on a hunger strike now for 6 long weeks, 42 days. And I fear he's not long for this world, but he is so angry at what has happened to him, and yet not once of the mainstream news media has even reported that this is what's being done to farmers all across Australia.
And so you're going to break the blockade.
The silence of the mainstream media is culpable and serious, and something is going to have to be done about it.
Well, that's obviously because they're very, very scared of the truth. And I have seen reports in Australian news the last 2 years in a positive way saying, isn't it great, this farmer will not be paid and no more sheep or no more corn. And they just calmly announce, and here in the U.S. they're talking about laying land off use, and the Supreme Court ruled with New London versus Kelo that they can take your property without just compensation. I mean, this is the real heart of tyranny, not just taking property and the power to tax, the power to destroy, and taxation without representation, but now we'll just take your factories. We'll give $25 billion to the automakers as a bailout so they can move to Russia, move to Eastern Europe, move to Brazil, move to China. They're paying to move jobs. They're paying to shut down farms and factories because once we're bankrupt, we'll be fully dependent on the globalists. That is their plan. And